So the title of my Dharma talk is Uncertainty, and it certainly felt like the most timely topic I could imagine, as we are less than a week away from, well, we're in the election. We're not a week away. I voted last night, but we're a week away till that we're done voting. And so not only are we uncertain about who's going to win this election, not just the presidential election, though that's the biggest deal, but also all the other candidates who will be voted or not voted into office. But we're also uncertain about when we'll have the results, and uncertain and scared about what the results will lead to, both in the outer world and perhaps also in our inner world. So I started to scan through my files for other talks on uncertainty, and I came upon a blog that Linda and I wrote in the very early days of COVID, when things seemed very uncertain and scary. And so I'm going to play around and read from that blog and adapt that blog to this time, with the hope, this time of uncertainty, with the hope that this leads to more curiosity and maybe even some clarity or some insight about what helped us during that last life-threatening time of uncertainty. So I read from the blog now. The coronavirus reveals just how uncertain things can become. Health news changes daily, hourly. New cases are being diagnosed. New routes of transmission are being considered. Remember when we didn't even know how it, now I'm doing this parenthetically. Remember, I'm sure you remember, when we didn't even know how it was passed and we were afraid it was on even in on our groceries. It was really destabilizing and scary. And so, with that sort of carefulness about, thinking we know what to suggest to you about what to do in times of uncertainty, because guess what? We're just trying to find our way through too. But it seems like finding some stable ground, finding some comfort, and finding some reassurance within, that kind of stability internally, to some degree, not perfect, when things are so unstable outside of ourselves. And this might be particularly more relevant if you find yourself more triggered or activated. And the stability we're talking out here is not looking for something permanent, but more like finding your pair of supportive shoes when you go on a topsy-turvy hiking trail, or checking your oil and tires before you leave on a road trip. So then, after taking refuge in some stable ground, there's lots to reflect upon during times of uncertainty that cuts right to the core of Dharma. How we handle uncertainty, of course, is based in many ways on conditions. Things such as, and now this was in the coronavirus, where we live, are we living in New York City or Seattle, or, a place where there's not much virus at the beginning, I'm talking, of the pandemic, and our age, our pre-existing conditions, the other people that are close to us, our plans for and arrangements for travel, etc. All of it's important. So to take what is important and go into an internal process gives a chance to get some clarity on what is stirred up for you. This is practice. You've been training for it, and now you have to use it, put it into actions. So what conditions might be relevant in how you handle the presidential election outcome and aftermath? Well, I certainly couldn't rattle down all of it as I thought about it, but a few things came to mind: where you live, how politically involved you are, how much news you read, whether you're queer or BIPOC or an immigrant or another group of people who are being threatened, whether you lived in a safe haven of people of the same political leanings as you, or whether you live with others who are across the aisle, so to speak. And I'm sure there's many, many other conditions I cannot think of, but conditions do form how we are reacting now and how we will react. Back to coronavirus, the blog. We all have been bombarded with information about how to handle the coronavirus. Now, present time. Similarly, we have all been bombarded with predictions of how the election might come out and what might happen after the election. And we create our own stories as well as reading them in the news. When we're uncertain and scared, we're prone to that, to create stories that are rife with too much certainty. Even if the stories we create are awful, they give us a sense of control, and that can seem relieving. Free-floating fear, it can be hard to tolerate. So I find myself wondering, oh no, let's see, do you have an obvious or subtle story you tell yourself about the election outcome? Do your emotions follow? Might you loosen up this story a bit, because we really don't know, nor do the pundits know. So the next part of the blog was really interesting to me, because with hindsight being 2020, we know how it turned out, right? What I'm going to read next, it was just a little bit of personal decisions that Linda and I each had to make. But right now, we don't have 2020 hindsight. We don't have that. We didn't have it then. So for me, there are many decisions that aren't clear. I'm scheduled to go to Seattle next weekend to a square dance weekend with about 100 people. Seattle is the epicenter for the virus, or is an epicenter, and square dancing entails continually touching the hands of other dancers, the very activity they're telling us not to do. And then I would have to fly into Seattle in a plane. Seems like that's a petri dish for viruses. Turns out I was wrong about that, or maybe I wasn't, but I think I was wrong about that part. So, fast forwarding, it really became clear not to go to the event within a few days. And by the way, then they canceled the event. After we changed our plane reservation, they canceled the event. But recently I learned that actually the square dances in the Seattle area were super spreader events. And I don't know why they didn't talk about that in the news. They talked about how it was going around in the choirs, but we didn't make the news. Many people got sick. I've talked to many over the years since I've been dancing with them again. A few died, others got long COVID. Now, here's a fun story. A bunch of them who all got sick with COVID at the beginning, who all danced together, they all got sick, and then they got better, and then they just spent lockdown dancing together because, they thought they were protected from the virus, which they kind of were. So that's a nice way to do it. And here's a story from Linda. We're going to cancel the March Quest Haven residential retreat. I've talked with the retreat center and polled the participants that have registered. The cooks for the retreat have canceled. It is the cautious, safest move. We all took time off, made room in our schedule to retreat. Thankfully, we were able to offer this retreat online instead. In hindsight, now I'm fast forwarding to now. In hindsight, that really turned out to be an appropriate decision. And actually, I think it had led to many more online retreats, and they've been very accessible and beneficial. So good things came from that. I often have this fantasy that I'm what I don't know 30 years from now, and I'm reading the history books about the Trump era and can get the long view of where this, how this went, and and what were the conditions that the historians were noting. And of course, how the history is written all depends on how it goes. But at any rate, I still have the fantasy. But it's just a fantasy. Instead, here we are in present time, having to live through it, having to live in the uncertainty, having to live in the scariness of it, the fear, each in the conditions of our lives, our individual lives, and hopefully live through it while causing as little harm to ourselves and to others as we are able to do. So that is my pre-election Dharma talk, and